Well, welcome back. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is our third episode where I'm interviewing my special guest. Normally, I like to think of myself as the smartest person in the room. And what I mean by that is I'm just a strategic management consultant who happens to also be an artist. But the person with the real smarts today is my guest, Adam Specht. And if you've heard the previous videos or watched them, then you'll know he's got 20 years of expertise under his belt. There's a few notches there. Maybe he's getting to the last notch on the belt. That's all good. So with Adam, let's today I said in the last episode we're going to go off the rails. We've been talking about training as a strategy, and sometimes pure disasters happen when there is no strategy.
Oh yeah.
Or the strategy just goes a bit weird. And so, but for a warm up, I thought a lot of Adam's experience is tied up with train the trainer programs as well. So just the mechanics of doing training. So just to find some common ground with the audience, Adam, why don't you give us some horror stories of where you've seen training go wrong?
How much recording time do we have?
We'll keep it short.
I've really been looking forward to this discussion in general. But in terms of just tactical level training disasters, the chief amongst them is having 700 slides, and I mean literally 700 slides for an approximate 2-hour session. So if you do quick math, that's roughly about 5 seconds per slide. I mean, it's just bonkers. And participants immediately fall asleep at the death by PowerPoint. I think we can all relate to.
Yeah, 700. I have been in a sales meeting at a previous organization where they whipped out 100 plus deck, but 700?
700. Yeah. It's really the representation of when people go to build a training session who aren't familiar with how to train. They open up a slide deck. They go, what's the first thing I want to tell them? Next thing. And it mushrooms out of control. And that's how you get death by PowerPoint. That's not how you plan a training session.
I guess Microsoft have got a lot to answer for, really, haven't they? I mean, they're all about productivity. But in fact, when it comes to training, PowerPoint has actually hindered a lot of productivity through really not being the right tool for getting the training message across.
Without a doubt. And don't get me wrong, a training presentation should have a visual element. Utilizing a slide deck or using something like PowerPoint, totally fine. It's how you do it that is the important part. But death by PowerPoint is example number one, and I've got a million of those similar stories, and I'm sure most of the audience can relate to that as well. You ready for example number 2?
Yeah, go on.
Sitting into a virtual training session, very common these days, especially post-pandemic. It was an all-day session, and the presenter literally lectured the entire time. No games, no activities, no breakout sessions, no Socratic method, nothing. Literally an 8-hour just running dialogue. You can only imagine the audience at home. Cameras were probably off, and they were doing any number of other things while the sound just played in the background. But an 8-hour virtual training session that was nothing but a speech for 8 hours.
I hope he didn't have a test at the end.
Oh, tell than test. It's a great approach. And that's another example, whether it be death by PowerPoint or just a nonstop 8-hour lecture. We've all sat through that. I'll give you one more. This happened in the past with a company that I worked with, rolling out a new software to the entire organization. They pull everybody into a large conference room, bring in third-party trainers, can only imagine what they paid that other company to deliver the training. Very first words out of their mouth, everybody shut your laptops. So they literally were going to do a training on software, and they told us to shut our computers. And it was a good couple hours before we even got to utilizing the software, and everybody had switched off immediately by that point. So training on software, but we're not going to let you use your computers to see, touch, feel, or taste the software. Completely bonkers.
Yeah, and I think, it's really an example of not having a strategy for the training itself. As we've spoken before, a strategy is all about positioning people's minds and their beliefs and building a view of them and trying to position yourself also in an area where the audience is heading. You want to head them off at the pass and hand them something on the way, like a traditional old getting on the airplane. Remember the old days and the Time, Women's Weekly, and they give you, I'd offer you something to read on the plane, right? That sort of head you off on the pass and get you distracted.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder sometimes, the one thing I hear that's in common with all those examples is people just wanted to hear themselves and do an information dump. If I give you the Wikipedia, then surely you're now knowledgeable as I am.
You're 100% correct. And usually where corporate training goes wrong is that there's no defined session objective. There's no analysis on the front end to say what is the business issue we're trying to solve. There's no alignment between the training itself and big picture business issues. Training is often just a data dump of here's everything about everything, as opposed to being laser focused on the key need to know points. Those are the sort of the counter or cornerstones. And then you'll lay that out in a very simple to follow crawl, walk, run methodology. And then the pieces fall into place. Unfortunately, most people, and I'm not knocking the people that were doing these trainings, in most cases, I'm willing to bet those individuals got no instruction on how to train. They got no guidance. So they were sort of set up to fail a little bit on the front end. But it all ties back into training is not just here's a bunch of information, good luck. It should be aligned with the strategy on the big picture. But even those tactical level trainings should have that overarching message. You said with an airplane, you get on the airplane, you're going somewhere. And hopefully you know where you're going and you get there. Training should be the same way.
Right. Fantastic. So I guess that ties us now, we've done the warm-up exercise, we've done the icebreakers, we've done your icebreakers, okay? Hopefully you're on the same page as us, that when training goes wrong, it's really miserable for the audience. And what we're going to talk about now is that when there is no strategy for training in a company, that's miserable for the employees as well as the customers. And I know you've dug into your history, your historical documents, as they would say, the historical documents. So why don't you fire one up, and that'll just give me a chance to drink my coffee. So we'll get 2 for 1 in the same thing.
Hey, this is productivity in motion. So a number of these examples come from my network, and some of them are from my own personal experience. But the first one comes from the NBT Nation, as I like to call it. Working with a firm, they have multiple different locations, 10 plus sites. Each site is responsible for the orientation and onboarding of new hires at their location. And while
let me just back you up a bit. Sorry. So this is a story that's been passed on to you. This is not an MBT production story. This is one which you've heard from someone who follows MBT.
Yeah, exactly correct. Yes.
Sorry, carry on.
No worries. So, here you have an organization that has already problems with staffing, problems with attracting talent. Now their onboarding process is 10 plus different versions at 10 different locations, very heavily relying on shadowing at a number at the vast majority of those locations. There is a corporate level training group, but they don't have the wherewithal to ride herd over all of those different locations. So the employee churn, the talent churn is through the roof. the quality of the new hires getting, ramping up to effectiveness is quite poor. So you talk about impact on the customer. You talk about confidence like we've spoken about in our previous episodes. And you just have this sort of hand-me-down tribal knowledge. And there's no ability for the corporate leadership to really infuse the ethos of their organization. There's no chance to really have that sort of consistent messaging of here's why we do what we do, here's what's important to us. So for as a quick starter, I like that example, not because it's happening, but it really paints the picture of there's no coherent strategy. It's just 10 plus locations kind of making it up as they go and getting the results to show for it. An easy fix is to bring that all up to the corporate level with a strategic direction.
Right. Yeah. So it's normally my experience that when you've got a large group of people, if you don't have a strategy, a clear direction of where you're taking them, chaos ensues, because the default behavior of people is, oh, I don't know what's going on. I'll just have to do what seems right. Every man for himself.
Yep.
Sorry to my women listeners, but that's how men are. Every man to himself.
Every person to themselves.
There we go. We'll bring that into the modern age. Well done. So, yeah, without a strategy, it can be chaotic. And kind of reminds me a little bit, there was a company I worked for years ago, Texan Company, Plano, Texas, EDS, Electronic Data Systems. They used to do these great ads, Super Bowl ads, fantastic. But they had one, and it was explaining what they didn't do. And you see these two guys, and they're running down the street, and they're finding all sorts of people down the street, and they're just handing them a couple of $100. And, there's all sorts of, there's hobos, there's clowns, just all sorts of people. And then they rush them upstairs to this building, and they fill this office full of random people to pretend they had a call center.
Oh my God. Oh my goodness.
But that's what that company effectively is doing that you've just described. If they don't have a clear way, right across, a uniform way of training their staff, if there's 10 different ways of training them at 10 different sites, you wonder how the customers are going to cope with a company like that. You wouldn't think they're long for this world. All right, well, that's good. And I need another slug of coffee, so give us another story.
So our second example comes to us from the financial services world. This is for a sort of customer service type role. Imagine when you call into the 800 number and you have to update your password or move some funds around or do some of those basic financial services type things. These individuals would be the voice at the other end of the phone that I'm be glad to help you. Can I get your password, et cetera, et cetera. Individual joins the company, is supposed to get an approximate 1-month training program to learn all of the various systems of that institution. And they have a number of them. They have umpteen different, you go to this for this thing, and this for this thing, and this for this thing. Sounds great, right? Hey, there's a training program, month-long, fantastic. After 3 days, this individual had their training cycle truncated because we're just too busy and we're going to have to throw you into the fray, start answering the phones, and then we'll do some sessions down the road, and just call me if you got any questions. I mean, you know exactly how this story ends. Insane amount of frustration, insane amount of wasted time for the organization and the customer, because every single call that comes in, I'd love to help you with that. Let me place you on a brief hold. And now they're feverishly messaging, whoever will answer. How do I do XYZ? Well, it may not shock you to learn. High amount of turnover in those roles. High amount of customer dissatisfaction being reported in via surveys. huge amount of disconnect between the workload that's being given to those folks and the time they have to complete it, because every task they have is, factor 10 longer than it should be because they weren't trained on it originally. So I have some solutions for that, but that's the basic story for this particular example.
Right. And, what I hear from that example is, in fact, that they had a strategy. They actually had one, but they didn't have anyone strong enough to execute to that strategy. And maybe the strategy didn't fit the circumstances. There's no point building a boat if there's no water. It's like, maybe I need a car to get me there, not a boat. So you have to adjust for the environment you're in. And I'm glad you've mentioned solutions. Because, and here's the cliffhanger to our audience. In our next episode, Adam's going to be talking about solutions for when things go off the rails. How do you get the train back on its tracks? How do you straighten it all up? I mean, some of the examples he had, the train didn't even have any tracks. It just goes wherever. So what we're really interested in knowing is, how do you get strategy set up for training? And quite often we've been talking about not just training in a transactional sense, but learning and development, so that it's part of the DNA of the organisation, that people are really going to identify that organisation as a well-trained group of people who care about their customers. So I'd like you to tune into our next episode, but in the meantime, Adam, where can people find you?
I can be found in a number of places. The easiest place to find me is noboringtraining.com. That's the headquarters to find out all of the information you need to know about CAS concepts and No Boring Training products. I'm also quite prevalent on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for free daily training tips. CAS Concepts also has a page on LinkedIn. But the easiest place to start is noboringtraining.com.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely.
Thank you to the viewers for joining us. Where can you find me? Well, normally you find me painting here on YouTube. Otherwise, I'm out with my clients, helping them with their strategic problems. So either look me up on YouTube, leave a comment below. I'd love to chat with you. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.